Roger. We're recording another show. And just to recap the last couple weeks, we talked about giving up. I can't, he can, I think I'll let him. Then last week's show, we talked about cleaning up, steps 4 through 7, and, letting go, listen to some of those resentments and talking to your sponsor, admitting your wrongs to your sponsor. What are you laughing at?
I'm just watching.
And accepting responsibility for the things that you did in the past, and then looking at your character defects. This week's show, we're going to be talking about makeup.
Really? Lipstick?
No, make dash up.
Oh, that makes a big difference.
Makeup is one word, like lipstick is one word. So we got give up, clean up, and now makeup, and that's steps 8 and 9. And so in step 8, you make a list of all the people that you wronged and become willing to make amends to them. So it's kind of an inventory of sorts where you're making a list of people that you've wronged in your past, and it's another step that you really it's not going to be rainbows and butterflies.
Spoiler alert.
Yeah.
You find this list from your 4-step list.
Right. Yeah. Because you saw in your 4-step list inventory where you played a part in a lot of those resentments, and that's a great place to start. And when making this list, and then in the step 9, after you have the list, because step 8 is just making the list. And when you get to step 9, that's where you actually do the work of the amends. So, is this the step? I think I asked this last time we did it. Is this the step where it separates the men from the boys?
No, that is steps like 6 or 7. What?
No, this one is, they say, is where the rubber meets the road.
Maybe so.
I made that up.
I don't know who they are. Whenever someone says they, it always tends to make me think they have no clue what they're talking about.
It's people in recovery. That's who I'm talking about.
Just they?
Yeah.
Okay.
Folks in recovery.
Folks. Them guys
in recovery. Yeah, no, I've heard it called this is where the rubber meets the road.
Right.
Because all the preceding steps were all like inward, It's like you're looking at yourself mainly. Then when you get to 8 and 9, it turns outward to where you're dealing with your relationships with other people.
It's time to do something.
Yeah.
It's time to actually clean up all that past, and let's go ahead and seal the deal here. And that's hard. It's extremely hard. That I don't know. I mean, when we first set out on this little journey to simplify 12 steps, it was kind of complicated. I mean, how do you make it more simple? And that's the reason we said, we're going to say we'll give up, clean up, make up, and then next week is actually grow up. And it's hard to put all of this into one show of what you're trying to do here. But when we talk about making up, a lot of times, I'm sure you've seen it, and you probably did it. I did. Is that when you come in, you may have worked the first couple of steps. Your life is getting better. Things look bright, hopeful. Maybe even some of the shame and guilt starting to go away because you're seeing this new person that you literally think you can be now. You've seen God do amazing things in your life. And so now you want to start telling everybody you're sorry when you're around step 2.
Yeah.
That is just not the time to say it. If your story is anything like mine or the many people that I've worked with in recovery, is that people are tired of hearing your stuff. They want to see things in action.
Right.
They want to see you do something different. And usually by this time, when you get to these steps 8 and 9, where you're making up, is what we're calling it, is that's when you've put some time there. People have seen, you put some meat on them bones.
Well, but have you put some time?
I've
have you ever seen these 12-step workshop things where you go work all 12 steps in a weekend?
I have not seen.
You ain't seen those?
No, like I've seen in CR where there's like workbooks you work through.
Yeah.
But usually, even at some of the fastest paces I've seen is a few months at a minimum.
Oh no, some of these secular programs that I've seen where they do like a weekend retreat, they go work all 12 steps in one weekend, and I'm like, no, I don't know about that.
I mean, I guess you could. I don't know how.
It's not. I mean, it's not like it's forbidden to do, but like you were saying, like, I think to be able to carry out an effective amends, people have to have seen some kind of evidence in your life that you're really sticking with this, and you need time to do that. If you want to get people's trust back, you show them consistency over time.
Right.
That's how you win people's trust back.
You stole the trust word out of my mouth, because that's what I was thinking. People need some time to rebuild trust. Forgiveness, now don't get me wrong, it can be given at any time.
Sure.
We don't have to wait till we get trust before we can forgive. But people, if you've been down my road, you've said those words so many times. I'm sorry, I'll never do it again. It won't happen this time. Whether it's a fair, whether whatever the struggle is that you're talking about, that you're working steps on, there's a lot of lip service that goes on with that. And with good intentions, you meant it every time you said it, that you would never do it again. But for some reason, somehow you always found yourself doing it again. People are tired of hearing that. I mean, I was tired of saying it. And so I wanted things to be different this time. And the only way I could do that was to give it some time before I got to this idea of trying to make up with, the relationships I've broken.
Right. And, as far as making a list, I don't think you need to go back to the 8th grade where you stole, you copied, your homework off of somebody's homework, or, cheated off of their answers or whatever.
I'm
and they
so
got
glad
mad
you
at
told me that, because I would have to be going to make a new list here.
I mean, I think there's, a level of where, you don't have to make a list of every single tiny little thing you've done wrong to somebody, but anything where you've caused any kind of a real damage in somebody's life, that needs to be on there. Or it might not be a person. It could be, it could be a job that you stole from. That was one of mine. I stole from a job that I had, and I put them on there. And, it can be, it doesn't have to be a specific person. It can be, other things, institutions.
Yeah. People, places, institutions, businesses, really anything, that could be part of that.
Yeah. So you got your list.
Yeah, I got a list.
You've made a list.
Probably the best way to get started. But, I also see that, through that list, some of those people we may not even hurt. I mean, they may have just hurt us. And I've seen some of that, of people. How about people who've been molested? Maybe someone had done you wrong in the process, whatever. You got to be willing to forgive them of whatever's happened, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, just because, so there's things that happen to you that you play no part in, but you still have to forgive them to be able to have any kind of freedom, but that's, there's, it's very tough to do, especially when you didn't play any part in it.
So let's look at both sides of that. And that's what that list kind of does here is there's some people that you just need to forgive. And let's just start there. That there's people who've done something to you after you've talked with your sponsor about different things, and there's just maybe those people that you played no part in, that it's time to forgive them. You've got to release them from the actions they did to you, because why? It's keeping you in bondage. I mean, they're not even thinking about you right now.
Right.
But yet you've toyed over what they did to you, how they bullied you in high school for years, or what this girlfriend did to you when they ran out with someone else, whatever. It's time to forgive them.
Yeah.
And I think that this is a normal thing that people have been dealing with for thousands of years.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
If you you and I Christians, we say that probably every show we bring that up. But there's a story in Hebrew in Matthew that talks about Peter, and Peter is actually talking to Jesus, and he talks about this in Matthew 18, and he's kind of sitting there with Jesus, and he's like, well, Lord, how many times do I have to forgive? Almost wanting this number of when is enough enough? When do you
Right.
quit forgiving somebody?
Yeah.
They've done this same thing over and over, just like me and my parents. I told them many times over and over and over, I'll never do it again. And Peter's saying, there's this time. When is enough enough? When do you quit forgiving and you give them the punishment they deserve? Because I think we're all get there. It's time to get even.
Yeah.
And even some of the Old Testament ideas that people say now, eye for eye, tooth for a tooth.
Yeah.
And, when is that? When is enough enough? And Jesus actually just tells him, that you don't ever come to that point. You
Right.
always forgive over and over and over. You find yourself willing to forgive. He uses the idea of not 7 times, but 70 times. And if you really kind of get into that, you find out that it's not so much a number.
Right.
It's not
Yeah.
7 times 70 or any of those different things. It's simply that you continue to forgive. If they keep messing up, you continue to forgive. If they say they'll never do it and they do it again, you still forgive them.
Still forgive them.
And that's the love that I found that Jesus has for me, because I screwed up so many times that I had to be willing to go and ask for forgiveness. And, he's always forgiven me every time
Yeah.
I've done it.
Because when you go to make amends with somebody, if you haven't forgiven them, how can you really, how can it work? Because, like, it's one of the things that I've had sponsors tell me before, like, when you go to make your amends to the person, don't say, I apologize for my actions because of so-and-so and so-and-so of what you did, because then, you're not, that's not really an apology.
Mm-hmm.
It's an apology with a amendment on the end of it, you
Right.
know. And so, like, if you haven't forgiven the person for however they might have wronged you, then I don't see how you can make a true amends with the person.
Right. And probably the better way that I've seen it for me in my own life is that if I'm unwilling to forgive someone, then how can I ask God for his forgiveness?
Oh, yeah.
Those made it really personal for me that if I'm not willing to forgive, then I'm playing God again in my life.
Yeah, what's the scripture on that one? There's a scripture that talks about that. Yeah, it's Matthew 5:23 and 24. It says, therefore, if you are offering your gift at the altar and there remember that your brother or sister has something against you, leave your gift in front of the altar, first go and be reconciled to them, then come and offer your gift.
There you go.
Yeah.
So if I'm going to go to God with my stuff, then I got to get my stuff right.
Right.
And that sounds kind of strange in a lot of ways because, I don't know, I can't hold on to this resentment in my life and expect God to forgive me.
Or somebody else.
Yeah, it didn't make sense to
Right.
me. If I'm walking around with that ideal in my head, then I'm simply playing God. And that didn't work. I mean, we covered that back in, the whole cleanup, give up stage, where I had to say, I can't, he can't, I'll let him. If I'm back now determining who needs forgiveness and who doesn't, then I've got back into I can do it myself.
Right. Yeah.
And that's not a good place to be.
So, practically speaking, making amends, like, I can't imagine doing any of the steps without a sponsor, but to me, this one is critical to have a sponsor there because, things sound good in your own head, like, hey, I'll go make an amends to this person, where, you might not need to have any business even contacting the person again.
How about this? I've heard this happen more than once. I'm going to go meet little Johnny at the birthday party. I'm going to go ahead and apologize to his mom while I'm there at the birthday party. No,
That's
is
not the
time.
Yeah.
You didn't talk to your sponsor, did you?
No. Yeah. And then all of a sudden you end up with a restraining order. Yeah.
Yeah, so making amends is important for a lot of reasons, but without a sponsor, sometimes our judgment just isn't good. We need to bounce that off a sponsor. And I mean, you can't go talk to someone who has, maybe you did something wrong to a girl in high school, of something you did. You confess that stuff to your sponsor, and now you've added it to a list to make amends to, and you say, I want to go apologize for using this woman in like inappropriate sexual relations. You used her as a trophy, whatever. I've heard several guys mention different things, and so now you want to go make amends for the actions you did back then, and she's married now.
Yeah, you don't need to talk to her.
That's not a good time to go talk.
No.
Don't go rehash the past. We're past that at this point. And so I've questioned that myself. I went and just a real personal example. I went and told my mother about making amends to her and apologizing for everything I had done to her, and I wanted to make things right. But during that process, I told her about me now shooting up and not just taking prescription pills.
Yeah.
She didn't know that. And so that made it worse.
Yeah.
I mean, I didn't need to go into all those details with her and how bad it was.
Yeah.
And so I'm not supposed to cause harm to the person I'm making amends to. That's a big key thing. Regardless of how much relief I get from it, I can't find relief at someone else's expense.
Right. Yeah. It says except when to do so would injure them or others. Yeah. That's a huge one. And you need an outside opinion like a sponsor to help you navigate that, because I mean, these are complex, interpersonal relationships, with either family or friends or whatever. I mean, it can get really complicated, and there's a lot of layers to it. And if you don't have somebody who's, somewhat guiding you through that, then, you can end up making it worse,
I was terrified the first amends I made. Now, I've heard several people do it several different ways. Some say, well, start with the easiest one to make, and then you can gain some confidence to make the hardest one.
Right.
My sponsor didn't do that. He said, okay, let's number these from the hardest to the easiest. And so I did. He said, okay, we're going to start with that hardest one. And it was to a relative. I had to go to my grandfather and talk about a gun that I stole from him. And it was extremely hard because I just know the conversations he's had about me. And I didn't expect it to go good, honestly. And I talked to my sponsor about how I expect it to go. And a lot of it you can't plan verbatim because you don't know how they're going to respond. I told him kind of how, and he explained to me it's not about what they've done to you. You're there for you. And I had to remember a lot of that stuff because he had said some things that was really hurtful to me. But I wasn't there for that. I was there for what I had done to him. And he drove that into my head. Don't matter what he says to you, you're there for your side of this. And all right, so we had all these conversations, and just for the sake of time, it all went really well. And through that, I gained a whole lot of freedom from that. We actually restored our relationship over that. Like you were mentioning in one of our shows, that you could now go back and sit and be family gatherings and stuff again.
Oh, yeah.
And I was like included in the family again. Well, that gave me so much relief. I wanted to go do my next one and my next one and my next one.
Mm-hmm.
And there were very few times I just got shot down and people were unwilling to forgive me. They usually went much better than expected. And that gave me the momentum to want to go do another one to clean up all this wreckage. But I found myself doing it so much so that I was willing to do it at other people's expense. Not thinking clearly that it may hurt them to get this extra little bit of freedom and to clear this up.
Yeah.
Without a sponsor, I would have made a lot of bad decisions.
Oh, yeah.
I still made some bad decisions in this process. But, I'm in the process of rebuilding the stuff today, not tearing it down. And without a sponsor, I couldn't do that right.
Yeah, and I mean, the first time I did mine was the most substantial, obviously, of course, because you're talking about years of, amends that you need, people that you've hurt and amends that you need to make. And, my sponsor was good about saying, you need to leave this one be for a while. This one's probably not one you need to make right now. Or this one, there was one on there. I've had a couple on there where, the person had passed away, but I felt like I still owed them amends, and I wrote letters. Never mailed them, of course, but it felt good to at least get that out. And I've since, I don't think I owe an amends to anybody. We'll get to that in next show or whatever about keeping your, keeping your relationships, keeping it all your side of the street cleaned up.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but there were several of them that didn't go well. There was a couple mainly that didn't really go well at all. But that was okay because most of them did, and I had built up that this was going to be a big boogeyman in my life. When I was looking at it, and I was really scared about it, but most of them went really good, and most people are happy to hear, that I was doing good, or they had already heard that I was doing better, so that made the amends go a lot smoother. They were like, oh, just keep doing what you're doing. I know you're doing a lot better. Because, most of the time with these type situations, your actions, the people are looking at your actions. They're not really worried about as much as, about what you're saying to them. They're more worried about, what are you doing? And to those amends that you don't really need to actually talk to the person and contact the person because it's just going to hurt them or others, you make a living amends. And that's where you change. You don't act like that anymore. You've made a radical change in the way you live your life and the way you treat other people. And that's the amends that you're making to the person that, to contact them would injure them in some way.
Which, again, is the reason you need a sponsor, because I've seen a lot of people just cop out with that one and go,
Yeah.
oh, I'm just going to make a living amends to everybody.
Right.
And there's some you need to make.
Sure.
I remember my first sponsor always talked about his sponsor, which my sponsor owed a lot of money to the tax man. And he just wouldn't pay the taxes. I mean, he's dead and gone. That's the reason I'm saying this. And he's like, I don't want to pay the taxes. And he said, his sponsor said, just write the check. It's their money. Send them their money. And without a sponsor, he would have definitely just never wrote the check. It took my sponsor, that same guy, pushing me a little bit on some of those things, because even though I found freedom, some of them are just still terrifying to make.
Yeah.
But it is important just to kind of stop for a moment to say this, that amends are more than apologies.
Right.
Because that's normally what we do is say, I'm sorry. That's not an amends. If you're doing that thinking that's amends, you are failing at making amends. An amends is simply, well, maybe not simply, but it is saying I'm sorry and not doing those things anymore. And like you said, changing who you are for better. But it's also about asking them, what can I do to make it right?
Yeah.
That is probably the kicker. Without that kicker, I don't know that you've made an amends personally, because people don't want you. If you stole $1,000 from me, I don't want you to come say you're sorry. I want you to come say, I'm sorry for stealing your $1,000, and I don't have $1,000 to pay you right now, but I'll be glad to pay you $100 a month. Or whatever.
Yeah.
You figure out a way to make it right.
Oh yeah.
And as you said, there's been a lot of times, even that time with my grandfather that I talked about, I stole a pistol from him, and I was telling him, I don't even really have all the things in order. I've got $60 right now. I can pay you for it. He didn't want the money, and long story short, I made him take the money. But I didn't have everything just right to say I can pay you all off, but I was willing to show something.
Yeah.
And that's part of me making an amends. It's not just saying I'm sorry. You've got to do something to make it right. And the ball's in their court. If they say don't pay me, then fine, don't pay them.
Yeah.
They're okay with that living in amends or whatever they ask you to do. Or maybe they tell you to pay someone else. Then you go pay someone else.
Yeah.
You're kind of at their mercy, but you did something that needed to be done right.
Yeah, I mean, I knew a friend who actually, when he got to this step, he went and turned himself in because he had outstanding warrants, and his sponsor told him, hey, you need to do this because you have outstanding warrants, and the way to make it right is to go turn yourself in, and he ended up getting like a way lighter jail time because of it. The judge, went a lot easier on him because he turned himself in.
And had he not, you're always living in this fear,
right?
And so if you're going to clean up the wreckage of the past, you've got to clean it up. You can't keep avoiding it and stuffing it back in the closets.
And I remember thinking when he did that, I don't know if I could have done that or not. Yeah. It was. Like he ended up coming out and sharing in a meeting, talking about how he grew more by doing that in his recovery, than he had in all the previous steps.
Right.
Because, he was taking real action and suffering consequences because of his previous action, but making it right, even though it was not going to be a walk in the park. He believed in it enough to do that. And to take real action.
Well, I know, as we kind of wrap all this up together and put a bow on it, as we're talking about making up, it's important that we forgive other people, that we are willing to ask for forgiveness from those people as well, or from others, and that we're ultimately, by asking forgiveness and forgiving, am I saying that wrong? By asking forgiveness and forgiving those people who have hurt us, it gives us a new confidence about ourselves. That we can look people in the eye again. That we can not hide, like just that example you're giving from that guy who turned himself in. He's not looking over his shoulder anymore.
Right.
He has a clear conscience now.
Yeah.
And I don't know, there's a lot of people not even in recovery that don't have a clear conscience.
Oh, yeah. These principles work for anybody, not just people in recovery. Mm-hmm. You don't have to be suffering from an addiction and trying to be doing 12-step recovery to understand that, keeping your relationships with people healthy and, not full of resentment and unforgiveness is a good thing. They're good. It's a good way to live. And nowadays, which we'll talk about this some in the next episode, nowadays, I can't stand to think that I owe somebody an amends or an apology. I just, my tolerance to that kind of pain nowadays is very low, where I used to not care at all if I owed anybody anything or if I had wronged anybody. It just didn't bother me. So, living this way is much easier than carrying around, all the baggage of resentments and unforgiveness and, being a tornado in people's lives and hurting them.
Well, that kind of sums up 9 steps in an hour and a half worth of conversation where, over 3 episodes now, we've talked about, in the first 3 steps, we talked about giving up, where we were willing to stop doing it ourselves. And then our second episode, we talked about cleaning up, where we talked about steps 4 through 7, about what it was like to take an inventory of ourselves and to begin sharing those things with other people, accepting some responsibility, and looking for some patterns in our character defects, which, leads us to makeup, which is what we've talked about today, and those steps 8 and 9, where we begin to forgive and be forgiven so that we can gain self-confidence in ourselves. And that will all lead us to next week's episode, where we will begin talking about growing up. And I look forward to meeting you again and talking more about it. And I hope our listeners enjoy it as much as we've enjoyed talking about it, because it is principles that work for anyone, anywhere, regardless of what they're dealing with, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Well, that is another one in the books. And I will see you next week. I'm Roger.
I'm Jason.
We're signing out.